If your kid is disappointed and sad that playtime is over with you, they can feel that. And you can say, I know, it's really sad. It was so fun. And so it's hard for it to end. I know. And that's okay. You can just let them feel their feelings with your support.
So don't yell at them for not understanding your emotional state.
I just
fucking gave you 2 hours. Okay, so let's record the intro now.
So what did Milkless? Because I think we start with the name.
Two dads, we love our kids, but then we also need them to know that we're like pretty cool and it's not like a wimpy podcast. So, hey, Milkless.
Hey, welcome. Hey,
Milkless. Call the audience, Milkless. What's up, Milkless? Max coming at you.
What if that's it? That's our first take.
All right, Matt, today we have another special guest, a friend of the show at this point. We got Payne Bryson, Dr. Tina, back on with us. She has a new book coming out January 21st called The Way of Play. Tina, thanks so much for coming on again. Really excited to have you here.
Thank you. I loved my time with y'all, and I'm so glad to be back. And let's have some fun talking about play.
Let's do it.
How do you want to get into this? How do you want to get into here with?
Well, it's a great question. I feel a little underprepared because I haven't gotten to read the book yet. Like we're having an author on, and I haven't read the book. I think there's a couple of things to talk about that the book addresses. One is kind of the idea of play therapy and why that's really a powerful tool. What might be interesting is to kind of start there, and then how does that translate to parenting and just what you do in your house and the value of that every day.
So this book, many of you know my books, Whole Brain Child and all those that I wrote with Dan Siegel. This is with a new co-author, Georgie Wizen-Vincent, and she is not only a play therapist, she trains other people for how to be a play therapist. And of course, I'm a therapist too, pediatric and adolescent therapist. And I've got 3 kids, so we can talk a lot about all of this. Here's the deal. What this book is about is taking the secrets of what we know about what happens in play therapy and bringing it into your living room and in your car in micro moments, like a few minutes at a time. Play therapy is an incredible way to think about intervention. So play therapy helps kids build skills. It helps them process things that have happened that maybe were traumatic or difficult. It helps them with transitions. When we think about therapy for adults, typically you're like, okay, they're on a couch, the therapist is in a chair, and we're talking about thoughts and feelings. We're telling stories and narratives. We're trying to, make sense of our stories. We're trying to get some insight. We're trying to challenge some thoughts. When you have a kid, they typically don't want to sit for 45 to 50 minutes of a therapy session and talk logically about their thoughts and feelings. That's not actually helpful. The first language of children is play. And so when we're talking about play, it actually isn't just for little kids either. We all need play throughout our lives. But play therapy allows kids to process information, build skills, and help their brain develop optimally. So what do we do at home? Like how can we even think about play? Well, can I start by just telling you why I wrote this book?
Yeah, give it to it. Yeah, please.
So here I am, a trained pediatric therapist. I have 3 boys, and the way that they played was super foreign to me. Like, when I played when I was a little girl, I am such a nerd. Y'all, please do not judge me. I loved playing, like I would go to school and then I'd come home and play school teacher. And actually that's my first degree. I am still certified to be a high school English teacher in the state of Texas. I would play library and I would get my books out and get the little things and I would write the due dates. And I actually, this is hilarious because it's so me. I also loved playing Julie McCoy from The Love Boat as being the cruise director. And I'm 100% the cruise director personality. In fact, I have a clipboard next to me right now. And so
your 3 boys didn't play that way? Shocking.
No, and I would love to sit and color. And I didn't have any weapons in my home, and we had a couple of water squirters, and I didn't at first have any weapons, but my children would chew their grilled cheese sandwiches into guns, and I would buy them baby dolls. And they would try and see how fast they could squish their heads into pancake in door jams, trying closing the doors on babies' heads. And I would watch other people's little girls play. And obviously, temperament has a lot to do with it, more so than gender. But my 3 boys loved to rough and tumble and all of these things. So I would watch them play. And the way they wanted me to play with them, I was like, this is super foreign to me. And if I had to bang super guys together 3 more times, I was going to lose my mind. So I found play at times incredibly boring. I found play at times just like it would never end. Like, do we have to do this for hours, right? I wrote this book because so many parents who really want to play with their kids don't know what to do. Like, you tell parents, like, play with your kid. Follow their lead, just play with them. And they're like, okay, so I'm on the floor, now what? So parents often don't know what to do. They find it boring, or they think they have to do it for long periods of time. So this book is strategies for how do you play in micro moments, 5, 10, 15 minutes longer if you want to, in ways that are going to be fun for your kids, build your relationship, but also build skills. If you know my catalog of books, I'm all about how do we help build brains. And it's always done through relationship and regulation. And particularly if you have kids you're concerned about aggression, you're concerned about sibling conflict, you're concerned about some immaturity emotionally. How can you use play like a therapist would to help them expand their window of tolerance and build those skills to be more emotionally resilient?
When you say build skills, I think probably a lot of parents' brains go toward, how can I play a game with them that makes them better at math? How can I play a game with them that will make them make the varsity soccer team because there is a lot of that kind of vibe out there.
Yeah.
But you think about skills, I think when you say skills building, you think about it pretty differently. So maybe you could kind of define like what kind of skills you're talking about.
It could be cognitive skills. It could be emotional skills. It could be relational skills. So I was thinking about this morning in preparation for our podcast about how, it's kids love to do it. And it really is the work of childhood. In fact, when we look at all the mental health challenges that youth are having today, one of the hugest antidotes would be to increase play. Like, I can't believe we're at a time in history where we have to defend the need and the relevance and importance of play for children. Like, I can't believe we're there, but we are. You think about your little toddler who has the toy where there's the shapes and they have to figure out which little, they've got the little pieces that fit in certain shapes, right? This is exactly, so the brain develops skills based on repeated experiences. So later, when you're trying to move a piece of furniture in through a door and you have to turn it to figure out how to get it in there, they learned that with that first little toy, of manipulating objects in space, right?
Pivots? Sorry, I just think of that Friends episode. Pivots? Does he write? Pivots?
Pivot.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I love that episode. See, he should have spent more time, not with playing dinosaurs, but playing with those little objects that fit in the spaces, right? So it could be that. Or like, here's another example. One of the strategies in the book is called bring emotions to life. Okay, so this is a way that we would build the kind of skills that we're talking about for naming emotions, tolerating emotions, problem solving in response to emotions, building emotional resilience. So my boys loved little action figures, little superheroes. So my son would play, we'd have like a pirate ship or a little castle or something. And for whatever reason, my eldest loved tying knots. In fact, the time my husband got the most mad at him, we were at the airport. We had to get the car seat out and take it with us. And he had been sitting in the back behind his brother, and he had tied like 40 knots in the car seat thing. So we couldn't get it out. And he's like sweating. In fact, we were in Texas, so it's like super humid. He was sweating. It was
there is no sweat like car seat sweat. There's it is unbelievable. Just drenched.
So with Ben, I'm like, I would tie a rope onto a doorknob, and then the other end of the rope would tie to the top of the castle, and then another one would go to the ship. And so we would have super guys, and he'd be like, oh no, we got to get on the ship. I could just put the guy on there and take him down to the ship. Or I could say, oh, but it's so scary. I don't know if I can go over the shark-infested waters. Oh, no, I don't know if I can do it. And then he comes in and is like, you can do it. Come on. We've got another guy that's going to help you, right? So there's more that kind of gets brought into it by me bringing an emotion into what this action figure might feel. Then all of that gets processed in the brain. Like the next time he is afraid, he has better language for it. He knows, like his solution was, you need a guy to help you, right? And to get that assurance. So what we're doing is tons of emotional skill building, language skill building, relational skill building. All of that's happening by just following the lead. And this one strategy, like I said, is bringing emotions to life. You just bring emotions into the story of what's unfolding.
How do you do that, though, if, like, that's my natural inclination, and, Matt and I met in college as thespians in West Side Story.
Yes.
So,
might be overstating
this is
the
all
case.
very, but we have a lot of listeners and people I know who, this is not their natural inclination. And maybe even Matt and my spouses. Like, playing make-believe is very difficult for some people. And, the the feeling silly in the moment of being silly and doing play acting. So how do those parents do that when it's like not their natural thing?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is you don't have to do that. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I hate doing that, that it's not me and I'm never going to do it, that does not mean you're a bad parent. There are lots and lots of ways to play. You might prefer the strategy think out loud, which is where you're literally kind of narrating what your kid is doing and not just like sports casting where you're like, oh, now you're moving the car up the ramp. But you're also bringing in a little bit of sort of mind sight where you're bringing in what you think their intentions are. So you're like, oh, it looks like you might be building a ramp. So what you're doing is you're vocalizing what you're seeing, but what you think they're intending to do and what they're kind of planning for. And then they can correct you if you're not right. You're giving attention to their mind and what their intentions are. So that's much more like less dramatic, that kind of thing. But I would also say that our brains used to be really good at that. All of us used to be good at dramatic play. And as we grow up and become very responsible, we have forgotten how, it's like our brains don't know how to do that sometimes anymore. And I would really encourage you to find the joy of going back to that place. And if it feels uncomfortable to you, start with coming up with another character. So you don't have to be yourself. Like I saw this hilarious thing on social media where it was a mom and a dad and they were playing store. The little girl had like her little checkout cart and her groceries. And the mom like just became this, she just pretended to be somebody else with a different accent and just kind of got into it. So and you can even be Mary Poppins or be someone from one of the movies your kids like, somebody from Frozen or whatever your kid is into, Paw Patrol. You can be one of those characters and you just imitate that. So you're not having to generate a lot. But the more we wade into these places, the more fun they actually can be. And then we want to do more of it and it becomes more natural for us.
Sometimes I think about it as like kids are so much in that part of their brain that is present, that is really good at play. And sometimes as parents, we kind of have to act as the part of their brain that ain't there yet.
Yeah.
Which probably makes us worse at playing, right? Because like we're so much in the part of our brain that's like, how many minutes till dinner? I was realizing the other day, like 3 times I hadn't looked at any clock in 2 hours and I guessed within 2 minutes what time it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, but what's the cost of that? There's got to be a cost to that running in the background. And I know like people get uncomfortable talking about gender a lot, but like so often that hits the moms hardest. And so dad gets to be the fun one because dad doesn't know what's for dinner.
I think that's absolutely true. And I really relate to everything you said. And by the way, even in same-sex couples, there's typically one that's much more the mental load, one that kind of is holding the bits and bobbles of how to make the day work and the time-to-time work, and one that isn't as much. This is really important. And I so identify with what you're saying there that I feel like I can give a couple of suggestions. One is if you can set a timer for 10 minutes where you are giving yourself permission to take 10 minutes away from the kind of the lineup of what needs to happen next, where you give yourself the freedom for 10 minutes, 15 minutes to just be completely present. So you're kind of scheduling that time to really be present and play. I think that can be really, really helpful. But I also want to say it doesn't have to be carved out time. We don't have to just play in designated play spaces at play times. We can be playful. So that's why we actually call the book The Way of Play, because it's a way of being as a parent. So if you're trying to get your kid into the car, when kids don't want to go into their car seat, they're like 2x4s. They don't bend. They're like they're like freakishly strong, right?
Yeah,
so,
they're straight legging you. She's straight legging you. My wife and I will say that to each other. I'm getting the straight leg.
And it's funny because I have parents all the time. They're like, I don't want to do an effing puppet show to get my kid to put their damn shoes on to get in the car. But I will tell you the amount of energy we spend in the battle is so much harder than saying like, please don't get in your car seat. I really need you to not get in your car seat because my friend Herman, my imaginary friend Herman, is sitting there today. And if you sit on him, he's going to do that yelling thing. And then I'm going to have to do that weird dance to make him be quiet. Like, I don't want to do it today. Your kid can't wait to get into the, into the thing. And the other thing you can do that really helps elicit cooperation that doesn't require as much of the dramatic thing, for those of you who are like, that's not my bag, is start a story. So your kids are needing to put their shoes on, grab their stuff, get in the car. I forgot to tell you guys, I have this amazing story about these 3 squirrels that were lost and they were looking for their friend and they couldn't, and I'm like making this up right now. It's probably going to be a terrible story, but you just start something, right? And then you're like, get your shoes on and get in the car and I'll tell you what's going to happen next. So it's a playfulness that creates some joy and some anticipation. It's not just something we do, it's a way of being and how we are.
So my natural inclination is to play like that. How do you balance like their ability to just play together? Our siblings could play together all night, but then I feel like I'm neglecting them. I should get in there. And then so I get in there, but then they won't let me leave.
Yeah.
And then there's no, right amount of play. But then there's other times where it's a rainy day outside, so we're playing board games inside. And I'm playing so much. We're making up games. We're making up like little trivia games. We're making up like wrestling games. And it's just, at some point, Dad needs to tap out. And I need to go back to you guys playing together without me.
Yeah.
How do you manage that where my brain is very traditionally American, slightly obsessive or addictive, where it's like, well, more is better.
Yeah.
So gotta keep playing more.
Yeah.
Because I love my kids but I need time for myself too. So
absolutely.
What about on that extreme?
Well, they need time without you
exactly.
up in their business. Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the best bonding things for kids is to conspire together, to prank their parents or to do things on their own. So I would say there's tremendous research that talks about unstructured free play out in nature and all this stuff. There is very little written about, at least for the common parent. I mean, there's definitely tons in the literature, but in terms of the common parent, very little about how to play with our kids. And one of the things we address in there is how do you stop playtime when it's time for it to be over?
Right.
And one of those things is like, it's back to the whole idea of boundary setting. If your kid is disappointed and sad that playtime is over with you, they can feel that. And you can say, I know, it's really sad. It was so fun. And so it's hard for it to end. I know. And that's okay. You can just let them feel their feelings with your support.
So don't yell at them for not understanding your emotional state.
I just
fucking gave you 2 hours. That's the worst. That's the worst feeling is when you play so hard, so good. You don't set the boundary. Hey, I got to go real quick. And it's like they just want to be with the fucking awesome guy they were just with for 2 hours.
I mean, you're clearly awesome. You're clearly
so awesome.
No wonder they're so upset, right? I think it's, if you can incorporate your exit into the play, depending on what you guys are playing, like let's say you're playing, chef or restaurant or whatever is going on. You're like, I got to go down to the docks and get some new shrimp. Like, I'm going to be gone for a bit. So what are you guys going to, so you can incorporate your exit into the play. The other thing is setting timer. You can also start a song on your playlist when the song's over. Then I'm going to go do some other stuff and then I'll be back. You can do all kinds of things that kind of create some natural, they can anticipate your exit. But if they're having fun and they're playing and you spend a good amount of time with your kids, I know you do, you should not kind of feel like, oh, I better get in there because it's something I should do. If you're not spending time with your kids, you absolutely should prioritize at least 15, 20 minutes each day where your attention is solely on your child. You're following their lead, whether that's in play or even just snuggle time at bedtime where you're reading and talking about the day. That the kids need that from us. But I think you can give yourself permission to allow them to play because that's super beneficial for their relationships.
This episode of Milkless, featuring Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, is brought to you by Dr. Tina Payne Bryson's new book, The Way of Play. Now, obviously, you can tell just by listening to her, this woman is a powerhouse. The book is just the next in a long line of brilliant books about parenting and raising kids. But particularly, I want to make a shout out because Dr. Bryson lives in Los Angeles. This was supposed to be the week of her book launch, but instead is the week of dealing with crisis, especially she's in the mental health field. She's got family. She put out a thing on social media yesterday saying, I'm so proud of this book. This is supposed to be the week that's about this, but it can't be. It's about all these other things. So help me if you can. This is us trying to help out. Check out the link in the description for a discount code that she gave us special for our listeners. She's a great thinker. So I encourage you to check out the book and help out an author who's really done something great. That idea of following their lead is really interesting because I do definitely, especially with my youngest, with my 2-year-old, some of our most wonderful times, those times, and Max and I talked about this recently, it's wild. It is those times when just out of nowhere, my 2-year-old will say, I love you. Not in response to me saying it to her. It's just like...
It just bubbles up.
It just bubbles up. It's like, oh, you get what that... You know exactly what that means. That is what I am feeling right now. And a lot of times that really does feel like that is largely the result of following her lead. But another thing that Max and I talk about a lot, because we've done 2 or 3 episodes on play, because it's just core to how both of us feel close to our kids. The other thing that we were always looking for is like, how do I make it fun for me too? Because I know I'm going to be a better playmate. Like you can take one for the team for a little while.
Well, you have to when they're little. When you were saying the blocks in the shape thing, I just had horrible flashbacks. Of like, I need to be drinking while I'm doing this. Like that is my worst. I hate the in the shapes,
blocks and the things.
Good job, you got the star in the thing.
Yeah. Now, Max, is that hard for you? Like, is that an area you need a little more remediation, or it's just boring?
It's just boring. I mean,
Max is super. Max is so good. He gets the square one and the square one every time. He's just a little bit bored by it.
I like all the other games. The
well, and keep in mind, like when you're talking about that age, they're banging stuff together. They're sticking the stuff. There's not a lot. Like, you really like the dramatic play. You like all the fun. You like the emergent story. You like all that stuff. That's not really, in that moment when they are manipulating objects in space, like that's not as interesting and fun. Mm-hmm. So at different developmental stages, you'll enjoy play more or less. Some parents really like the sitting and moving the objects and stuff because it's kind of like task oriented, and like that feels more comfortable for them. What I love about thinking about whatever the play is, like I said, is their first language, but it's also how they navigate and process what they're trying to figure out. And just like when kids love the same story being read over and over and over, what's happening is they're scaffolding knowledge. There's a familiarity to it. So they like that. That feels safe and predictable. But also they're kind of really internalizing it. That happens in play. They want to sometimes play the same things over and over and over. They're typically processing things that are happening in their world. And then they're also learning and exploring for the future. So there's this really interesting study done where there's this toy that was kind of an unusual toy. No one had seen what it does. These kids had never seen a toy like it before. They first showed the researcher like how to play with the toy. And then they gave it to the kids, and the kids kind of did what the grown-ups did and didn't play with it very long. Then they gave it to another group of kids where they didn't show them at all what this toy did or how to play with it. And the kids enjoyed it more. They played with it way longer. They came up with ideas that were outside of how they had thought about the toy being used. So you can really sort of celebrate like them being on their own and doing it their way is really, really powerful. And you can just even sit and observe and really kind of tune into who your kid is. The other thing that's really great is, okay, there's this is like, we're going to get sciencey for a minute. Lev Vygotsky is a developmental psychologist who talked about something called the zone of proximal development.
We've talked about this. We've talked about Mr. Vygotsky.
Okay, good.
That guy.
About needing to be a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. So the strategy we're calling it is scaffold and stretch. So if your kid is doing the same thing kind of over and over and over, it might be really interesting too to add in something. So the idea of this is the Goldilocks principle. Like, you don't want to have your kid doing something that is totally outside of their capacity to do it. But if there's something they're really good at, you want to stretch them. And so there's this zone of helping scaffold their development to a little bit higher level that is attainable with a little bit of support or with a little bit of prompt. Like, I wonder what would happen if you tried that a different way. So it's not totally like super easy for them, but it's not impossible for them. It's the Goldilocks thing. It's like, it's challenging. It's something they haven't done well or they haven't mastered yet. How can we get them to try that?
I also feel like kids have a natural pull to that. Like, if you go to any playground, there are more kids going up the slide than down it. Like, down the slide should be funner. It's fast, but up the slide is challenging. Or like,
definitely.
If I go with my 6-year-old and my 2-year-old to a playground, my 6-year-old will like make an obstacle course out of it. Even if it's playground for little kids, she's like, I got to get from here to here without touching the ground. Yeah. And it's hard. And she wants something that's actually right at that edge of what she's able to do.
It's incredible if you start really sort of looking at these things, because kids are trying on difficult emotions. They're trying on scary things. They're trying on what it feels like to be in power and control and to threaten other people and be the mean bad guy. I remember one time my son said, he's like, Mama, I'm going to be the good guy and you be the bad guy. And I was like, I don't really want to be the bad guy. And he's like, well, Doc says, and that's his grandmother, my mom, who's a clinical psychologist too. He's like, Doc says there's a little bit of good guy and a little bit of bad guy in all of us. And he was like 3. And I was like, oh my gosh, you scare me. Like you're going to surpass all of my skills by the time you're 4. But I think it's an incredible opportunity. So if you have something coming up that you think your kid might have some separation anxiety about going to a new sport or going to gymnastics class or starting a new school, scout it out. So before you go for the first time, you're like, we are detectives. We're going to take some binoculars and we're going to go scout it out. And you go ahead of time and you don't go into the building, you don't, whatever, but you're checking it out and you're making observations and you're kind of increasing some positive associations with those things.
The thing that we always did for that, we would do this role-playing thing. So before daycare, we would set it up in our house that kind of looked like the same door. And we'd say, all right, here we go. Because our sons wanted to be able to be good at drop off. And we never said like, you're bad, good. But they would say, I want to have a good drop. I want to. And then they would always cry at the window. And it was like traumatizing. But then they never wanted to leave because they loved it there.
Yeah.
But it was just that moment of separation. So we started prepping it. And same thing with bedtime. We would say, okay, Daddy's going to go. Bye. And then we would laugh like, bye, Dad. And we did it like 4 or 5 times. And just having those reps of being like, okay, I can do this. Then, okay, we're driving in the car. We're like, all right, we're going to daycare. Are you ready to do what we practiced? All right, here. And it just started working.
It's fascinating. As we're talking about this, I'm going to there's 9 different threads here. And I'm not even sure how well they all connect. But I keep coming back to the idea of story and how often play involves story. There's this great story that Kate DiCamillo tells where she knew this little girl who kept reading. Kate DiCamillo's great children's book author. She knew this little girl that kept reading Charlotte's Web over and over and over again. And she asked this, I think she was an 8 or 9-year-old girl, why do you keep reading it again? Do you think something different might happen? Do you think that maybe Charlotte won't die? Because it's a very sad story to read over and over.
Yeah, it is.
And this little girl said, I know what's going to happen. I don't think anything different's going to happen, but every time I get to the end, it's okay. And when I was 7, we had, and we've talked about it on the show before, a really traumatic experience with a home invasion with kind of a borderline hostage situation, I guess, when I was 7. I went and saw Dr. John Pack, who saved me and my family in many ways, and we played Dungeons and Dragons. I remember I got there and we just played, not like the board game. And the most successful movie I ever wrote was a monster movie. And when I think about even, Dan Siegel's work about before he met his true co-author on Parenting from the Inside Out, he said one of the greatest. It's a great book. Yeah, that one of the greatest predictors of how good a parent a person will be is their ability to tell the story of their own childhood in a cohesive way. And so there's just all these different ways, and not all play is story-based, but so much of it seems to be about constructing a story that allows us to safely live in uncomfortable places without actually having to be in them. That shit is so cool to me.
It really is. And you think about, and that's from the attachment research, what you're quoting there, that the number one predictor for how well kids turn out is that they have secure attachment with at least one person. The number one predictor for how well we're able to provide kids with secure attachment doesn't have anything to do with whether or not we got it. It's whether or not we've reflected on our story and been able to create a coherent narrative where we're not running from our past story. We're not flooded by it all the time, but we have processed it. And you're exactly right that so much of play is about the child getting to be the author of their own story. And if you think about a child, it's constantly at the mercy of everybody else's decisions. They're at the mercy of their own emotions. They're at the mercy of their body, all of these things. And so when they get to play, they get to be the author. One of the things we call play is a protective factor. And in fact, there are studies out of UT, Dr. Stuart Brown, who after the school shooting happened at UT in the 60s off the top of the tower, he went and interviewed every death row inmate in the entire state of Texas. And he found two things were in common. One was they had a history of severe child abuse. And the second one was they had a history of little to no play. So one of the things we know is that play is a protective factor for us in allowing us to navigate the actual stories of our lived lives from day to day, to have perspective, to be able to flexibly shift what is happening with our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors. So it really is absolutely crucial. And, this is why you think about, you watch like some of the Disney movies and you read fairy tales, like some of that shit's really dark, really
Super
dark.
scary. Yeah.
Yeah. And scary. And it's like, well, is that bad for kids? I remember a high school debate with my debate teacher about whether or not it was like, I'm like, should kids be exposed to those kinds of things? And the truth is that when kids are exposed to appropriate adversity in the context of safety, that builds resilience. And play is incompatible with threat states. So what I mean by that is, this is actually based on some studies that were done on rats. Who knew rats actually play? And when they would and they could measure, this is Jock Panksepp's work. They would measure the rats' amounts of play and laughter. They actually laughed too. Who knew? But as soon as they would introduce a cat hair into their area, their environment, they would stop playing.
Wow.
And you think about this, like when birds are singing, things are good. If birds stop singing, it usually means there's a threat present. So we know that
that's the game.
That's the
Yeah.
game.
You're not in practice anymore.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
game.
That's the game. Yeah. Well, and birdsong lowers our cortisol levels,
It
right?
does.
Which is
It
one of the
does.
reasons being because okay, the birds are good. We're good. Yeah.
Cue of safety. It's an auditory cue of safety. So what's really, really fascinating is that play, because play is fun. If it's not fun, it's not play, right? If it's, it has to be fun. It has to be joyful, or it's not considered play. Because it's fun, they are able to tolerate more difficult things. So if you're frustrated and you are wanting to play one thing and your sibling wants to play something else, but it's fun enough, you're going to be more flexible and you're going to tolerate your frustration longer because it's fun and you want it to keep going.
You made me think of something that I don't think I've shared it on the program before, but it's a game that we play, and I don't really know why we do it, but everything you're saying, I was seeing it through the lens of this game that I've invented. Yeah. It is our kids' number one favorite game. I invented it because I was so tired when we had our third child. I didn't want to, so I wanted to find a way to sleep a little bit.
Be horizontal, yeah.
Yeah. So it's called Sleeping Giant, and I'm the giant. And if they touch the back of my neck, if any one of the three kids touches the back of my neck, I pass out. And I typically pass out on top of them, and then they need to lift me off to save the sibling. And usually I'll get two of the kids down and I'll be tickling them, pretending like I'm eating them or tickling them. And I'll say, you got to call for the third sibling, call for them. And they'll be like, so-and-so, come save us. And they'll like do a diving, touch the back of my neck. Then I fall on top of those two. Then that person needs to save them and take me off. And then when they touch me again, I wake back up again. So they're in complete control, but I can pretend to be the borderline of scary.
Yep.
And they just absolutely love that. And I think that it has also done a lot of like bonding amongst the siblings. You cannot play Sleeping Giant alone.
Yep.
They need to get someone else to play because someone else needs to save you. Because otherwise I just lay on top of them. It also teaches them like wrestling with young kids where like body control I think is really strong. And also that like Matt said this thing, or he got this quote from somewhere, that like our job isn't to teach kids that dragons don't exist. Our job is to teach them that dragons can be defeated or whatever.
Yeah. It's like an old quote about fairy tales don't exist to tell kids dragons exist. They know. I remember when my daughter was like 3, she woke up late and I was closing up the house. And so I picked her up and just went to all the doors and made sure all the doors were locked. And she was like, what are you doing? I was like, I make sure all the doors are locked. And she said, so no one comes in. And I was like, oh,
Yep.
Like, so now like, how do we give you power in that situation?
Yeah.
So much that's play.
I think, and the Sleeping Giant game, you're kind of, there's some like a little bit of scary, but it's all in the context of safety. So it's again, them trying on, how do I titrate fear or waiting for the giant to wake up. Like, how do I do that? Knowing I'm safe. So it's like titrating, tolerating emotions is exactly what's happening there. Plus some good proprioceptive input of like heavy lifting work, which is what occupational therapists love for kids. So play is the protective factor in that play states and threat states, they're really opposite states in the nervous system. So I've actually used this quite a bit therapeutically. I had a little girl who had severe separation anxiety, and there were some other things going on. She did have some sensory processing challenges and things that kind of made everyday moments really explosive for her. And we had tried all kinds of different things, and I was like, I've got to figure out a way to increase to her window of tolerance for mom leaving. So she was probably 8 or 9 years old. Her mom had a meeting. They knew it was coming up. And what I did with her is I was like, all right, here, we're going to prepare for this meeting. You know it's happening Tuesday night. I want you and your siblings to come up with a plan for pranking dad. Because what would happen is the minute mom would reach for the door, this little girl would get so upset she would vomit. She would grab her mom and like sometimes rip her clothes. Like and it wasn't because her dad was unsafe. Her mom was her best strategy to feel regulated. So when our mom was leaving, it felt like the world was ending. But what I said, now, when your mom reaches for the door, that is the cue to launch assault sock dad. So they had gathered a laundry basket full of socks. When mom reached for the door, that was the cue to start throwing socks at dad. They put his underwear in the freezer. They put fake bugs in his dinner, and they had the whole evening planned out, siblings together. And of course, dad knew this was all coming. But what was happening was we created play, which meant a cue of safety around a particular thing that was typically dysregulating. And what happened then is there was anticipation of fun waiting for that night as opposed to anticipation of fear. And what we're doing then is we're decoupling the automatic wiring in her brain of mom leaving, it's terrible. And we're trying to recouple or rewire her brain for mom is leaving and I can handle it. And it actually was kind of fun. So play is not only protective, not only does it help our kids titrate emotions and try on feeling in control and all of these things, but it is actually incompatible with these threat states. So the more we can kind of use play and safety cues to let them practice difficult things, the more then they're going to come out resilient because they're like, I handled that. I could handle it.
It's so cool because it's like, one way to think of it is like play can't happen unless you feel safe. But another way to look at it is like, if play is happening, I am safe. Like it can kind of go back in the other direction. I think
it's an incredible tool.
That is wild and so cool. Yeah. And I think the other thing that it like that makes click in my head, I think so often we're like, oh, my kids play, they went to soccer practice. They went to, but like there needs to be a point to play other than the play itself. But it's like, no, the point of playing is playing because play makes you feel safe.
That's right.
Because play helps you live in a world that is not the actual world. Like play does all of these things, even if no other skills are being built. The point of playing is playing.
Just for the sake of play.
And also, I think like a gut visceral reaction to the story of the, doing the prank thing on the dad when the mom was leaving, like a gut thing might be like, oh, well, if you're doing that, then you're just kind of like redirecting or tricking her. She's not feeling the true emotions. But what now I'm thinking from what you've been saying on this episode is like, well, sometimes if the neurons are so trained into this reaction that all I'm doing is replaying the thought of my mom leaving all day. I'm just making those neurons, it's so strong. Yep. You have to break that bond somehow. And by using a little bit of a misdirection, like, oh, we're going to kind of, quote, for lack of a better term, trick her into not freaking out, then boom, you built a new connection. Those scary thing that she's been replaying in her head all day just isn't there anymore.
You carved
you don't need that scaffolding anymore.
Yeah.
So that's super cool.
I would say that a little bit differently, where I would say it's not that we're distracting her or kind of tricking her. She's still feeling the discomfort of her mom being gone. She still doesn't like it. She wished her mom were there. The play allows her to tolerate the feelings she already has, and then it's exactly what you said. The ending of the story is different this time. So now there's the creation of the possibility of a different ending next time, which is I could handle it. And it was actually kind of fun versus it's going to be miserable for me. And I think that's what happens sometimes is like we force our kids to do something and it backfires. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes our kids are like, I didn't want to go down that slide, but that was super fun. Now I'm going to go again. But other times, depending on the temperament of your kid, we force our kids into something like swim lessons when they're infants and they're screaming the whole time. And parents are like, I just want them to get comfortable with the water. But I'm like, okay, now 5 times they've been in the pool and they're screaming. What has happened is you have now associated that experience of being in the water with terror and with, it's like, it's counterproductive because the brain wants more of what feels good and less of what doesn't feel good. And so we actually are creating the possibility of a new ending and an actual new ending.
I think that idea that of play as a tool for creating safety in all of these different, that is like such a fundamental shift from, I think, the way, because you hear like free play's good, play's good, but I think that people need to know why.
Yeah.
To value it the way that we should, instead of this insanity that we're currently in, that like we have to defend the idea that kids should be playing, which is nutty.
It is a protective factor. It's their first language, and it is the most effective way that they learn how to navigate not only the external world and the environment, but also how to navigate their internal landscape and their internal world. And if we can do that relationally by following their lead, not only does it do all of that, but it also builds the relationship. So it doesn't have to be for hours and hours. I would say really just even in short bursts, these micro moments of connection, build your child's brain, build their resilience, and build a relationship.